Well, I guess I'd like to create the number 5 politics is done in the darkness audio slash sometimes video container cast. And it's rather sporadic. I don't adhere to a time frame generally, although I guess it has been about every week or 2 weeks at the most that I've been putting out one of these audio type casts. I have been putting out a video called My 2 Cents. I've only done 2 of them so far. Maybe I'll do another sometime. But I guess what motivated me today to begin with, before I get into anything that is more concrete on the political end as far as news and world affairs, I've become aware through a YouTube channel called Morris 108 that I sometimes look at, that there's a person in France who seems to be an American by his accent and how he speaks English, who ran a website called IamTheWitness.com. And because he was afraid of a new French law that he claims allegedly prohibits free speech in a way that if the free speech causes any kind of social tension or upheaval, that you could get in trouble with the law, basically, in France for expressing yourself in such a way. It's hard as an American to even comprehend. Although in America, I know there's all kinds of stuff that goes on, and very unpleasant things are done to people if they're, for whatever reason, if they're seen too much as a threat, perhaps, or what they're saying, or I don't know. But we've seen, there have been cases, and I won't go into it now. Yeah, but they're there, and you can find them. But this is directly written into the law, which that, as of yet at least, hasn't happened in the United States. We do have the First Amendment, so that would be very hard to officially, blatantly do in the United States of America, because we ostensibly have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech. So this person closed down his website before the French government could close him down or go after him or whatever. And maybe he was jumping the gun. Maybe he was being a little bit too, I don't know, paranoid. Not that I'm not paranoid a lot. Maybe he got a little bit ahead of himself. Maybe if he would have left the website up, nothing would have happened. Or if something did happen, it would have finally gotten into the French media, and there might have been those who said this is a little beyond the pale. I don't know. But he didn't. He didn't wait, and he didn't want the trouble, and so he closed it down. Who knows how bad it is, really? I don't know. You'd have to ask the French how much freedom of speech they really have. I get the sense that they still have a great deal of freedom of speech, except for when it comes to certain topics. And this person was very much dwelling on Zionism and, the whole theory of how the rulers and the elite are sort of overwhelmingly governed by those who have a Judaic background and this sort of thing. Things which I know that there's a grain of truth to, in that, like, Israel exists, and it's a very important country to the United States, and the Israel lobby is very, very, very powerful in the United States, and we all know this. Cynthia McKinney could tell you a few things about that. But on the other hand, the United States, to some degree, I believe, has its own foreign and domestic policies, regardless of anything that Israel might be doing. I might be wrong and they might be right, but that's what I think. Nonetheless, what the United States tends to do, even though they're willing to overthrow a country here and overthrow a country there, and go after this leader here and so on and so forth, and that's been well documented by William Blum, especially in his book called Rogue State. On the other end of it, they're willing to bend over backwards for allies at times, certain allies, for instance Israel in many cases, but they're doing it especially now even for Turkey, who's causing them a great deal of trouble, it would seem, in Syria right now. Well, that leads me into at least the second, and we'll see if perhaps the last topic. I don't want to make this too long. Maybe I'll throw in a third topic, as I've already gone over 6 minutes now. The Russians and the Americans are talking about a ceasefire. Well, I don't know. It seems to me like, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like a case of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And the Russians seem to want to be believing of anything. Well, not anything, but too much. So look at what happened in Libya, where I guess that was more Medvedev than Putin at the time. They allowed the Americans to have their no-fly zone, which became a way of overthrowing the government of Libya. And, we know that story. That's just one example. I could probably go through, if I was on the ball right now, I could go through and find several examples. And this is just another example, I think. Why in the world would the Russians trust the Americans to enact a ceasefire, which is just going to allow the so-called, ISIS, the so-called, whatever you want to call them, really what are foreign fighters in Syria, backed by Turkey and others, we know that, to regroup. Well, I should say allegedly backed for reasons of staying clear, but I believe most likely backed by Turkey and others, these foreign fighters in Syria, that we claim Syria is a civil war, when really a civil war would involve two parties which are part of the same country. Even the American Civil War, to an extent, wasn't entirely a civil war. I mean, at least that did have the homegrown element of the so-called rebels in the South. But I've come to believe that there were outside actors backing or hoping or wishing to split apart the United States of America. I tend to believe, I could be wrong, there's some evidence to support this, although others would argue the opposite, the otherwise, that the British might have been not unhappy to see the U.S. Split into two countries. And why not? The U.S. was a future threat to the British Empire. We had already left the British Empire, at least in a way that was on the surface and outright and on paper. Maybe not with all of our attachments and ties. Certainly the Hamiltonians were very British in their outlook, and you could follow that line all the way through. But at least as far as any kind of agreement, or I guess you could say on paper, that makes the best sense. We left the British Empire, as opposed to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so on and so forth. And therefore, look at what happened. I mean, they were right. The United States replaced Britain as the empire. And right now it's the American empire. So I guess to end this, I would say that perhaps Gore Vidal, for whatever faults and what he might have had, and he certainly, we could, I'm certain people would point out that, and whatever he couldn't see at the time, for as much as he may be accused of, he could be accused of being another gatekeeper, although I don't think he was, not as much as some of these others. He, maybe he was just a bit early and a bit too hurried with his predictions of the end of the American empire. Seems to be that it's a much slower process. The only thing I tend to worry about, that I see more and more now, is how restrictive the new America, the America that emerges, at least for a time, will be when they lose their empire, as they lose their empire. How many rights, how many people are going to suffer simply because of a matter of civil liberties or freedom of speech and these sorts of things. And it does make me a little afraid, more than a little afraid, but nonetheless, I suppose I'm putting out this audio cast, this particular one nonetheless. It makes me quite afraid sometimes, because I understand the terrible things that they, quote unquote, and I think people know who the they can be, what they could do. All right, that's it.